Can you see the first slide of the lecture? Okay. Now, when I teach, I cannot see the chat box clearly, so I think Sarah is still there. If you or Sarah or any student sees that another student has posted a question that needs immediate attention, probably that student doesn't have a mic, please let me know. So feel free to interrupt me anytime you have a question, or if you see there's a question in the chat box. Okay. So this is the first chapter, Introduction to Human Genetics. This class is human heredity, and I'm saying genetics. So what's the difference? What is, a lot of the times these terms are used interchangeably and students really do not know the difference. And there's another term, hereditary. So hereditary, genetics, genealogy, what exactly do these terms mean? What's the difference? Genetics means when you're studying heredity and a lot of additional things. So you study anything about genes, that is genetics. You study about traits. Traits means characters, like what is the color of your hair, what's the color of your eyes, how tall would a person be, okay? Is the person more susceptible to a certain disease like cancer, like breast cancer runs in the families, okay? Prostate cancer runs in the families. So genetics is the study of genes, it is the study of traits that we inherit and how those traits vary. Okay, why is it sometimes your parents, both of your parents might be blonde, but then you have dark hair, had dark hair. So how did that transmission work? Okay, how did that work? So all of that is genetics, while heredity is a much narrower term than genetics. Okay, this is something where you are studying how those traits are transmitted from one generation to another generation. So genetics includes changes in the genes, for example, mutations, but remember, not all mutations might be hereditary. So a person gets exposed to UV radiation, let's say, or a certain, chemical mutagen. Those are chemicals that cause mutations. And that could be changing this person's, genetic material. And when we study that, it would still be genetics, but that change may not be hereditary. That person may not be passing it on to the offspring. So that means that is not heredity. So you understand now the difference between genetics and heredity, right? And then do not confuse between genealogy. Genealogy is a branch of life science which is mainly dealing with descent, ancestry, lineage, something very close to heredity. And nowadays, genetics has a huge impact in a lot of things that we do every day. Okay, everyday things. Personalized medicine, you might have heard of that, because medical science, biomedical science is very fast, it's changing and improving. And there's a lot of emphasis these days on personalized medicine. This was brought into focus by former President Obama, where he put a lot of emphasis on if we should really promote personalized medicine, because that could pave the way for treatment of various diseases, or at least explain why some people respond so much better to certain treatments while others don't. Okay, it's because we are not all the same size does not fit all. That's what is explained by genetics. So we're going to start with some very basic information. In the biological world, there's a hierarchy. There are levels of organization, from very simple, small things to really big, huge things. And the simplest and the smallest things in the living world, they are the atoms and the molecules. And if you've done chemistry, physics, you know a little bit about these. Right? The smallest unit is an atom, a carbon atom, an oxygen atom, and so on. And these atoms, they combine together, join together to form molecules. But what about living world? Are atoms and molecules considered living entities? No, they're not. It is only when you reach the level of a cell. This is the smallest living entity. So cell is the basic unit of life. Why? Because cell can exist independently as a living unit. And the cell is made up of, if you break up cell, you will see a cell behaves like a factory, and there are instruments in it, and those instruments are called organelles. Okay, and the organelles are made up of atoms and molecules. And then cells combine together, okay, multiple cells combine together to perform a common function, and then it becomes a tissue. Okay. For example, your heart is made up of cardiac muscle tissue. It's a very special type of muscle tissue. That heart muscle is not really similar to your biceps or your triceps. They are very different. So we have different types of tissues, 4 basic types of tissues. And then different types of tissues combine together to form organs. For example, your heart itself is an organ made up of tissues. Your lungs are organs. Your stomach is an organ. Your kidney is an organ. And then organs combine together to perform specific functions in the body, which are known as organ systems or body systems. For example, your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your urinary system, your digestive system. Each system is performing a specific function in the body. We have 11 major systems in the body. And all of these organ systems together constitute you. You are an organism. You are an individual. An ant is an organism. Okay, a very simple. An elephant is an organism. A human being is the most complicated organism. And then a group of organisms together make up a population. For example, right now we are conducting this class and we are a population of professor and students, right? And you might have also heard of this term species, or sometimes it's called a species. What is a species? Species is a group of individuals that can interbreed with each other. So human beings as a whole, we are one species, right? So human beings here, human beings in Australia, human beings in Canada, human beings in Asia, we are all human species. Why? Because there's the ability of interbreeding between these individuals. So what's the difference between a population and a species? Anybody? Do you know? Want to comment on something? What's the difference between a population and a species? You can unmute and let me know if you have any thoughts on this. No? Has anybody written anything in the chat window? No? So a population is a small part of a species. A population is those group of individuals within a species who are present at the same place at the same time. So although you are here in US and another human being there in Australia is also, we are of the same species, but we are different populations. Okay, that individual is not present in US, in California, in Riverside, at this time. So population means a small part of a species present in the same place at the same time. And then, if we are getting into higher levels of organization, populations together, species together constitute communities. Okay, and 2 main communities are biotic community and abiotic community. Biotic means living communities, means us, we are living organisms, the grass outside, the trees outside, the other animals that are present in the same geographical area. Okay, and the abiotic means the non-living community, the rocks in the mountains, the soil, okay, the sand, the water in the lake. All of those are abiotic communities, and all of both biotic and abiotic communities together make this ecosystem, and the ecosystem goes on to make the biosphere. So if I ask you in a quiz, please write down the levels of biological organization from the simplest to the most complex. Okay, so you would start at atoms, molecules, and then you'll go all the way up to biosphere. But if I ask this question, and change it slightly, and if I say, please give me the levels of biological organization from the most complex or the largest to the smallest. So even, sometimes students read the question, the first part of the question, but do not read the question completely. So they miss the second part where I'm asking you to write from the most complex to the simplest. And instead what they do is they end up again writing from atoms all the way to biosphere. You'll get a 0 in that because you have given me the wrong sequence, right? So you have to start from the biosphere, ecosystem, community, population, whatever, and then go to the smallest one, the atom. So please When you answer a question in your midterm, your final exam quizzes, read the question completely and carefully before choosing the best possible answer. So we said that genetics is about genes. What are genes? Okay. So there's so many ways to define genes, and actually it's one of the most difficult concepts to define. How do you define a gene? A gene, very simply stated, it's a unit of heredity. Okay? It is a segment of your genetic material. It is a segment of DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And genes are very important, very precious, because these contain all of your information, what kind of individual you would grow to be, okay, everything, because we all started our lives as one single cell, right? It was one single cell formed by the fusion of a sperm and an ovum from the paternal and the maternal side. Okay, a sperm carried 23 chromosomes from the paternal side, from dad. An ovum carried 23 chromosomes from the maternal side, from the mom, and these two fused, combined to form one single cell. That's how all of us, on all our lives, started. And then that single cell, how did it develop into this complicated organism that we are today, made up of millions of cells? Our body is made up of millions of cells. It's because all of the information was there in the genes, okay? Those 23 chromosomes, 23 plus 23, 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes that we had contained all the genes, right? And all the characters that we display, okay, are actually caused by those genes and an interaction with the environment. So it's called a gene-environment interaction. Whatever we are today is 50% genes and 50% your environmental influence. So remember, environment is also very important. It's a combination of both. And there are traits, which vary. Like some traits would have more of a genetic contribution, like your height is more dependent on your genes than your lifestyle, while your weight is more lifestyle dependent. So some traits have more of an environmental influence, while some other traits would have more genetic influence. So genes are made up of DNA. You might have heard of this term DNA in a lot of the detective TV shows. Every time there's a crime has been committed, the detectives go there and they're always searching for some evidence that the criminal has left behind, a blood stain or something. And what they're eventually going to do is extract DNA out of it, and that would help identify that particular individual. So DNA is the most precious thing in your cell. The cell will guard the DNA like anything, okay? So DNA is deoxyribonucleotides. It is a polymer. Polymer means something which is made up of the same unit repeated multiple times. You might have seen kids playing with Lego blocks, right? So let's say this Lego block has a lot of yellow blocks and red blocks. So a kid just made a long tower or something, structured by putting one yellow block on top of another yellow block, 3, 4, and so on. So that is a polymer of yellow blocks, means the same unit repeated multiple times. So similarly, the DNA is a polymer. And what are the Lego blocks that make the DNA? It has 3 different things. It has a chemical group called a phosphate group. It has a special type of sugar called a deoxyribose sugar. And it has some nitrogen containing chemicals called nitrogenous bases. And there are 4 versions of these bases that DNAs have. There is A, T, G, and C. These are very important information that all of you should have at the tip of, of your fingers by the end of this class. So A stands for adenine, T, thymine, G, guanine, and C, cytosine. So these A, T, G, C are the 4 bases that make up DNA, okay? And in addition, you will find the phosphate group and the sugar deoxyribose. And it is the sequence in which these bases are arranged. That is what is your genetic code. Okay, the coded information, A, T, T, G, C, 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 G, A, T, T, and every individual, we would have a lot of similarities because we are all human beings, but we also have some differences. And that is why as human beings, although we all have a pair of eyes, a nose, a mouth, 2 ears, and so we have similar structures on our faces, and yet we all look so different. Right? So it's very rare to find two human beings looking exactly similar unless they are identical twins. It's because of those variations in our gene sequence, in our DNA sequences. And as I said, DNA is very precious. Genes are very precious. So DNA is like the king in a cell, and the king does not work. Who does all the work? Or what is it in the cell that is doing? Every single cell in our body is working. So who in the cell is doing the work? The proteins. The proteins are the workers. The DNA is the boss. The DNA does not work. The DNA just provides the instructions, the orders. This is DNA shown in more details, and we will cover, there will be chapters where we will learn about the structure of DNA. So if this is very confusing for you right now, don't bother about it at this stage, but eventually you will learn. But you can always read, the information here gives you the structure of DNA. And the two scientists who discovered the structure of DNA, Watson and Crick, they got a Nobel Prize for this long time ago. Now, RNA, ribonucleic acid, what is that? Just like DNA was deoxyribonucleic acid, RNA is ribonucleic acid. So DNA is the king, the boss, and the DNA just has all the information. It's like your original documents there in the cell, and the protein has to do the work. Now, how will the protein receive the information from DNA? Somebody has to bring the information from DNA to the proteins. The RNA does that. The RNA is like a photocopy of the DNA, okay? So the cell makes a photocopy of the DNA, calls it RNA, makes some changes. If the DNA is too detailed, it makes it concise, makes it shorter and more compact. And the RNA comes out of the nucleus because the DNA just stays inside the nucleus, hidden, very strongly protected. So the RNA comes out into the cytoplasm of the cell towards the outer part, periphery, and then it gives the instructions, or it makes the proteins. So the workers are made and the workers are instructed by the RNA. So RNA is very faithful to DNA because RNA is like a photocopy of the DNA. So the instructions do not get messed up as the RNA comes out, right? And in normal healthy individuals, all of this is going on very precisely, no mistakes. But when there are mistakes made, what happens? It causes diseases. Something, called something as serious as cancer. Whenever things go out of control in the cell and things don't work perfectly, that is what is the cause for syndromes, diseases, even temporary problems in the cells. So what's the difference between DNA and RNA? As I said, RNA is the photocopy. It's also a polymer. It has the phosphate group just like DNA. It has a sugar, but the sugar is different. That's why I have this in red here. The sugar there was deoxyribose, here it's ribose. And the 4 nitrogenous bases, out of the 4 nitrogenous bases, 3 are the same. A, G, and C are same. T in the DNA gets replaced by a U, uracil, in RNA. So this is different and this is different, right? And RNA actually exists in different types because RNAs have to make the proteins and make the proteins work also. So that is why we have different versions of RNA. Now, what is genome? You might have heard of the Human Genome Project, right? A few years ago, this was big thing. Okay, the human genome is going to get decoded, and nowadays so many genomes have been decoded. A genome means a complete set of genetic information for one organism. So for in case of human beings, when all of our genes had been identified, had been sequenced by scientists, and this was a multinational project, several scientists in several countries were collaborating for this, and the entire human genome was decoded. So it includes all of the genes. And genome is that sum total of all the genes in the organism. And genomics is a field that is studying that genome. So genomics means when you study any kind of genome, you might be studying human genome, you might be studying the genome of a fruit fly or mice or whatever. Now, along with all of this information, genes, genetics, genomics, nowadays, so many, things are, all of these genetic tests and screening are available, comes the big question of bioethics, moral. You have to address the moral issue that arises from the interface of genetic information and privacy. Let's say an employer hires an employee, and then at the time of the recruitment drive, the employee has to undergo a medical test, and in that medical test it is revealed that the employee has a BRCA1 gene or BRCA2 gene mutation. That means that particular employee is at a much higher risk for developing breast cancer. Now, if the employer knows this information, the employer might be tempted to not give an offer letter to this particular employee, right? Because the employer is going to think, if I hire this employee, within a few years, this employee might get breast cancer, and this employee will then take a lot of medical benefits, will take leave from the work, will not be able to work as efficiently as another person. So that means that employee's medical or genetic information is going against that employee. So that is why we have to address these issues, and it's a very sensitive issue, bioethics. And that is why a lot of rules and regulations are now coming in place as more and more techniques are getting available to know a person's genetics. Proteomics is a branch of science that studies all the proteins that a cell makes. So when you see this term that ends in an X or a mix, like genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, it's just a study of something. Like proteomics, study of protein; genomics, study of genes; transcriptomics, transcript means an RNA, so it is the study of RNA, all the RNA in a cell. So human genome, as I said, the human genome has been decoded. It's been decades now. So scientists were very surprised when the human genome got decoded, because they saw that out of this huge amount of DNA that our cells have, only 1.5% of our DNA were actually directly encoding proteins, okay? And it gives you the number of protein coding genes, which makes up the exome of the particular individual. So then what is the rest of the DNA doing? If that rest of the DNA is not making protein, the scientists were like, is it all waste? Are we just provided with junk DNA, which is not doing anything, and that is making up what, like more than 90%, 95%, 99% of our genome? But very little is known. Scientists are still fishing about what exactly, because so little is known about the rest of the DNA. But for now, scientists, geneticists, we do understand that the rest of the DNA is actually more important than the protein coding DNA, because they contain a lot of regulatory areas. That means they are regulating or controlling the protein coding areas in different ways. Okay, so many. That is why, as more and more information becomes available, the student, the scientists are getting more and more surprised. As, wow, this DNA, which apparently is not coding for any protein, is actually so important. Clear? This is a particular database where genes that are known to cause disorders, certain characters or traits, these are cataloged. So when a research team, when a group of scientists, they discover something, they have to let authorities know. So they submit their information, their data to NIH, the National Institute of Health, and the NCBI NIH website. This houses the largest databases, the largest website all over the world for information on genes, gene sequences, genetic diseases, and so on. Is it clear so far, whatever I have covered? Anybody has any questions so far? No? Okay, next slide. Alleles. What are alleles? Alleles are different versions of the gene. Okay? In human beings, we have chromosomes that exist in pairs. Right? So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, a total of 46. That means we have chromosome pair 1. Let me show you a figure here. So this is what our chromosomes look like. If you take a cell and you cut it open, you cut open the nucleus, and you want to see your genetic material, this is what your genetic material looks like. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. You see, the chromosomes here are arranged in the decreasing order of their size. That means chromosome pair is the largest one. You go all the way up to chromosome pair 22. This is the smallest one, and then these are the sex chromosomes. So if female, then there would be 2 X chromosomes, and if you're a male, then there would be an X and a Y chromosome. So these, because we have chromosomes existing in pairs, this pair, these 2 chromosomes within a pair are called homologs of each other. These are homologous chromosomes. So these 2 are homologous, again, these 2 are homologous, these 2 are homologous. Now, what about if you take one chromosome from here and another from here? Are they homologous? No, they are non-homologous. So if we take a pair of homologous chromosomes, let's see, and you want to see the genes, you would find that in the same locations in both the pairs, you have gene locus, that means locations for similar traits. So let's say we have taken a homologous pair of chromosomes from plants, and if you're looking at this particular region here, you would find that this particular area in both the chromosomes has genes for the color of the flowers. Now, so this plant has, it could have flowers which are purple in color, or it could have flowers which are white in colors. That means even for the same trait, same character, that means flower color, we have variations, we have versions. And the alleles are the variants of the genes. So this particular pair of chromosomes, homologous chromosomes, it has 2 different alleles for the same gene. There's an allele for a purple flower here, there's an allele for a white flower here. There could be any combination. It could be both, purple, purple in both, or white in both, or it could be a purple and a white. So you see all these different combinations. And this is what happens in case of human beings also, because we get one of, these homologous pair of chromosomes, we get one from the mom and one from the dad. And we could have any possible combination for any of your traits, okay? It could be the same, it could be, the same of one type, it could be the same of another type, or it could be different. And these variants usually formed by mutations, changes. And these mutations, if it happens in the sperm or the egg, these are passed on to the offspring, the next generation. Mutations means changes in your genes, in the sequence of the genes. They're not necessarily always bad. They could be good, they could be bad, or they could be totally neutral with no effect, right? And mutations are the raw materials for evolution. Evolution happens because mutations occur. And mutations, they accumulate over hundreds and thousands of years, and that is what leads to evolution or formation of new species, new varieties of organisms. So variations, we see different types of variations in human genome, and polymorphisms are the most common type of variations that you would see. A very common type of polymorphism is called a single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNPs for short. So just to understand it easily, what would be a SNP? Let's say this is one, individual 2, individual 3. So this individual, the DNA sequence goes GC, AC, GT, TA, GA. While for this purple individual, these 3 bases are same, GCA, but here there is a change. Okay, instead of an A, this individual has a G, while the orange individual has a T. Now, if this change occurs or is found in more than 1% of the population, then that is considered a polymorphism. If this would be less than 1% of the population, then it's a random mutation. Then it is not considered genetically, it's not considered a polymorphism, a single nucleotide polymorphism. So for SNPs, these are single base sites that differ among individuals, and actually SNPs have been found to be associated with a lot of diseases. So let's say, a group of individuals who show cancer, a certain type of cancer or diabetes, and were compared, their genes were compared with another group of individuals who are healthy, who did not get diabetes, and we are matching for age group, for similar lifestyles, maybe similar socio-economic status, and so on. And why is that these individuals got diabetes while these individuals didn't get it? And when they checked for if there are any changes in the genes, And they found that SNPs, there are certain SNPs that if a particular individual has that SNP, that individual is very highly susceptible to a particular disease. And nowadays, just comparing 10 individuals versus 10 individuals, those days are gone. Nowadays, these are high throughput studies being conducted. So GWAS studies means genome-wide association studies, where they recruit thousands of study participants. Okay, volunteers are recruited, thousands, hundreds. So they might have a group of patients for a particular disease, as I said, let's say diabetes or cancer. And there's another group which are controls, healthy controls, not patients. And you take DNA from this group and you take DNA from this group also. And then you do a genome-wide analysis. You look at all the genes present and how the genetic pattern here is different from the genetic pattern there. And you're basically looking at the SNPs. So then you come up with a list of SNPs that were, principally found in the case group. That means in the, let's say that the disease patient group. And that's what you realize, okay, these particular SNPs make individuals more susceptible to cancer, while the healthy individuals who had, a different version of these genes, they remained healthy, they did not get this particular disease. So the genes are present on the chromosomes. That means genes are made up of DNA. That means the chromosomes are made up of DNA and genes. So what exactly are chromosomes? If you cut open a cell, you cut open the nucleus, you are going to look at the chromosomes. Chromosomes are rod-shaped structures. Okay, they are thread-like structures which are composed of not just DNA but also some protein. And each cell in your body, remember we have millions of cells, each cell in its nucleus has chromosomes, has the genetic material. There's only one exception, one cell in your body which does not have a nucleus, which does not have genetic material, and that is your red blood cell, erythrocyte. The red blood cell comes out, it is made as a pre-programmed robot. Okay, and the cell comes out and it knows it has to survive for 120 days and it does its job, and then the cell dies and all of the materials are, gets dismantled and the materials are recycled. That is the life cycle of a red blood cell. But for other types of cells in your body, they have cytoplasm, they have nucleus, and in the nucleus there is genetic material, which are chromosomes, those rod-like structures. And the chromosomes can, appear very different depending on, based on the stage of the cell. If the cell is not dividing, you will find the chromosomes as very thin thread-like chromatin. Then it's called chromatin. It's when the cell is about to divide, that's when the genetic material or the chromosomes, they become short, they become thick, they condense, and that is when you see, these rod-shaped structures. You can clearly see those chromosomes. Otherwise, it will be all a jumbled mess of long, thin, thread-like structures. Okay, and you find all of this in the nucleus. As human beings, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 chromosomes. Out of those 23 pairs, 22 pairs are known as autosomes. They are the same for men and women, males and females. The last pair, 23rd pair, is sex chromosomes, and females have 2 X chromosomes as their sex chromosomes, and males have an X and a Y. Any questions so far? No? So when geneticists, when a baby is born, and let's say a doctor suspects that there is a genetic problem with the baby has a genetic disorder. There could be so many things. There could be Down syndrome, it could be Klinefelter, it could be Turner syndrome. But the doctors need a confirmation. So they would need a help from a cytogeneticist. And most hospitals have geneticists, okay, and you have genetic counseling also. So the cytogeneticist will take a little bit of sample, blood sample or some other sample from the baby, from the individual, and the cytogeneticists, they draw out a human karyotype, something like this. So they want to see all the pairs of chromosomes, right? If it is all normal and healthy, this would show up at this. If it's a female baby with only these 2 chromosomes, if it's a male baby, then instead of these 2 X's, there would be an X and a Y. However, if there is a genetic problem, let's say if there is Down syndrome, which is pretty common. So Down syndrome means trisomy of chromosome pair 21. That means this pair here, chromosome number 21, you would see that the geneticist would see that instead of 2 chromosomes here, there would be 3 here. That means the baby has an extra chromosome 21. Okay, that is one of the causes of Down syndrome. So then the geneticist would write down the diagnosis that I see chromosome 21 trisomy, and that means the baby has Down syndrome. Clear? And this arrangement of chromosomes in this chart-like fashion, where the chromosomes are arranged from, on the basis of their size, from largest to smallest, this arrangement is called a karyotype. This is called chromosome karyotyping. So these chromosome genetic material, we started with how the DNA look like and the RNA, and then the DNA and the RNA make the chromosomes. And where are the chromosomes present? Inside the cells, in the nucleus of the cells. So human body, on an average contains about 50 to 100 trillion cells. Okay, anatomically, there are multiple types of cells. Every cell in your body would have nucleus and genetic material except for the RBCs. Now, some cells in your body have a very high regeneration rate. That means they divide very fast. For example, your skin cells, because we are shedding our skin cells all the time, right? The fact that you're sitting on a chair and listening to this lecture, the moment you get up, you know how many thousands of dead cells you have shed on where you were sitting. Or when you wake up from the bed in the morning, you don't know hundreds and thousands of cells that you might have shed on the bed sheet. Because our skin cells, as they get to the outer part of our body, they are all dead cells, and we shed them frequently, on a regular basis, and new skin cells are constantly being formed from the deeper layers. So skin cell is an example of a cell with very high mitosis, high division. There's another cell in your body which actually does not divide throughout its lifetime. That is a neuron, your nerve cell. So we are born with our, the number of nerves, neurons in our brain and our spinal cord, maybe up to the age of 2 years, up to 24 months of infancy. That is when our brain is still enlarging and new neural connections are still being formed. After that, your skull gets hardened. There are no more soft spots. Okay, you might have heard your grandmas telling, when you pick up a small baby, be careful with the head. The head still has soft spots. Okay, those are fontanelles. And you don't want to, you have to be very careful. Why? Because the brain is still enlarging. But after 2 years of age, the skull gets totally ossified. Okay, there's no more enlargement of the brain and no more neurons being formed. So we have to keep our neurons healthy, because they are going to last us for a lifetime. And of course, even if we do not meet with any accidents where neurons are getting damaged, just regular wear and tear, okay? The longer a person lives, there is more wear and tear. The neurons get old, okay? They are also old, their efficiency goes down, and we lose neurons as we age. And that is why the changes in a person's memory. When I was doing my PhD, or even when I was doing my undergrad, just like you, I could read a paper and remember it 2 years later. Okay, exactly what the paper talked about. Now I read a paper, and after reading it and completing it, and in 2 hours, I forget what the paper said. So I have to make my own notes and repeat. It is because of the efficiency of the neurons. Now, from a single cell, we became this human being. What caused this change? It was specialization, right? And that's why we are such specialized organisms, the most developed one. So the specialization in biological terms is called differentiation. From that one cell, that zygote, that was the starting of life, that one cell divided into 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 32, 64, and so on. What instructed that one cell to divide? How come from one cell we became this multicellular organism with kidneys, lungs, heart, brain, eyes, nose, everything? It's because the genes contained all the information, right? They brought in all the information, and the genes cause the differentiation. So this is the differentiation causes the cells to differ in appearance and function. So some cells just knew that they had to go and become the heart. Other cells migrated and formed your spinal cord. Some other cells went on to form the lungs. Other cells got and made the kidneys. And what were those cells? that had this ability to differentiate and to specialize, those were stem cells. Okay, so stem cells are undifferentiated cells, unspecialized cells that have the ability to differentiate and specialize. Now I added something here, cancer, because we're talking about cells. What is cancer? In very simple words, cancer means an abnormal cell growth. Usually in healthy individuals, our cells know when to stop. Okay, they just don't show totally out of control growth, or they just do not go on dividing uncontrollably. Every cell has a lifespan. Every cell knows I can divide for maybe 4 times, 4 generations or 5 generations or 6 generations, and then cells die. But when the cells become abnormal, something goes wrong in the checkpoints, that's when cells divide abnormally and continue to divide. Okay, that is cancer. So derangement of cell cycle, the cell life cycle, some genes which are getting turned on, some genes that are getting turned off, something abnormal happening with the genes or with other things. There are so many cellular pathways that get affected, so many mechanisms. Okay, cell fate differentiation, all of this can cause cancer. So there are 2 types of cancers or tumors: benign versus malignant. You might have heard of this term. Oh, no, this person's cancer has become malignant, or this person's tumor is still benign. What do we mean by that? Benign means less dangerous. Why? Because the cancer has not spread. Meaning the cancer has not invaded your surrounding tissues, the person's surrounding tissues, and the cancer is still restricted to a particular location. That means if the cancer has started, let's say in prostate, in prostate, I am a scientist who has worked with prostate cancer for decades now. I have also worked with lung cancer, so I will be giving you a lot of examples from cancer. So as long as, let's say, the cancer is still restricted to the prostate, it is still benign. But cancers, they like to spread. And where do they get a free ride? In the blood vessels. That is a free transport. Blood is the main transport agency in our body. So they like to take a free ride. And when will a cancer metastasize? You never know. Cancers are crazy. Okay, just like viruses. So they get finicky, and they can metastasize. Plus, every cancer has a different type of metastasis rate. So when a cancer spreads, that process is called metastasis, spreading. When the cancer has spread, it has invaded other tissues, it has infiltrated nearby tissues, that's when a cancer is called malignant. The cancer has become malignant. So prostate tumor cells, they love to go and they love to invade the bones. So they would take a free ride, and then they would go into the bones, and the prostate cells would go and form tumors there. So now imagine when a person has a prostate cancer metastasis, all the tumor cells are not just only in the prostate, but they spread to the brain. That's the brain metastasis. They will spread to the lymph nodes. They will spread to the bones. And inside your bones, all of those tumors, those little cells, they start accumulating and they start increasing in size. And at multiple places in the person's skeleton, the tumors, because of their increasing size, they fracture the bones. Imagine the pain. When with just one fracture, a person is given pain medication, imagine a cancer patient suffering multiple fractures throughout the body because the tumors are increasing in size and causing the bones to fracture. Now, 2 important set of genes play a role in cancer progression or cancer causing. Oncogenes versus tumor suppressor genes. What are oncogenes? Onco, this term onco comes from cancer. These are cancer causing genes, okay? We all have in our genome proto-oncogenes, means genes that are still in the inactive stage, but if they become active, then they become oncogene. That means they can cause cancer. But usually our cell, checkpoints, they keep these cells, these genes under control. Okay, and they would not let these genes become active, and that is why usually human beings are free of cancer. Another group of genes that helps control cancer or prevents cancer from starting is tumor suppressor genes. We have more than 30, and our guardian angel gene is called P53. P53 is the most important tumor suppressor gene. You have to remember this name. So most of the cancers are prevented because P53 is working in our bodies. And in a lot of the cancers, when a person gets cancer and the person has to go for genetic screening, you know, which type of cancer this person has, there would be a mutation in the P53. It was because the P53 stopped working, that's why the person got cancer. Of course, there could be multiple causes for cancer, but mutation in P53 is an important, occurrence that is seen in cancer patients. So P53 is the most important tumor suppressor gene. And as I said, if a person is healthy, that means everything, all the mechanisms are working efficiently with no mistakes. Every time a cell is dividing, the DNA is replicating. That means DNA is copying. Proteins are being made. If everything is made error-free, the person is fine. A single mistake or multiple mistakes, the body tries to repair. Okay, so we have DNA repair genes, which will do the repair work. And if a mutation occurs in this DNA repair gene, where the DNA repair gene becomes faulty and doesn't work, it could cause cancer. It could cause some other disease. So all of these cells together make the tissues and the organs and the organ systems, and we finally land here as an individual, okay, as human beings. This mouse is also an individual. And there are some genetic terms that you have to learn. Genotype, phenotype, what is dominant versus what is recessive. The phenotype means an external character, a visible trait. The fact that a person has dark eyes versus another person having blue eyes. So those are visible traits. So the phenotype of the person is the person has blue eyes, or the phenotype of the person is that the person has dark eyes. Now, genetically, let's say a person 1 and person 2 both have dark eyes or dark hair. Does that mean that they are genetically exactly the same? No. Genetically, dark hair could be caused by various combinations of genes, right? But if you know what is the inside composition, the genetic composition, then that is giving you the genotype of that individual. While phenotype is simply what you're observing from outside. And that is, here when you're learning about genotype and blonde hair versus dark hair, or blue eyes versus dark eyes, black eyes, comes these two terms, dominant versus recessive. For any trait, we have different versions, okay? And one of the version could be dominant over the other. For example, if you look at the world around you, what is the common type of hair? Do you see black, brown, dark hair, or do you see more blonde people around the world? I'm just asking a common question. What do you see? Which colored, which color haired people do you see more commonly, more frequently? Dark hairs or blonde hair?
Dark hair.
Dark hair. So tell me that means which one, just using your common sense, which one is a dominant trait? The dark hair or the blonde hair? Dominant means something that is expressed very easily. Okay. Which one do you think is dominant, is dominating over the other? The dark hair gene or the blonde hair gene?
The dark hair.
The dark hair gene. Right. So a dominant allele means, the dominant trait means that trait is expressed very easily. In genetic terms, even if an individual is carrying just one copy of that allele, that particular trait would still express. While a recessive allele means this is the one that gets easily dominated. It doesn't express easily. So for a person to express a recessive allele, the person needs that recessive version in both of the chromosomes. Even if a single chromosome, so in the pair, contains a different version, the recessive trait does not get expressed. So just the take-home message is, for a recessive trait to be expressed, you need that recessive allele in both of your chromosomes, while for a dominant trait can be only one. Now, geneticists also learn about families when they are tracing a certain trait, a particular disease, and you will see them make diagrams like these. And this is called a pedigree. Okay, a pedigree is a diagram which is used to study traits. It could be a good trait, it could be a disease trait, whatever. And this is how they make. And there are, all of these symbols have meanings. Like a circle means a female, a square means a male, a horizontal line between these two means an alliance, like a marriage. So, for example, this female is married to this male, and when a circle or a square is totally filled, that means the trait is there, the disease could be there. For example, this male is free of that trait, while this female has the trait. And you see this vertical line shows biological descent. So this particular pair produced a son and a daughter. The son was free of the trait, maybe didn't have the disease. The daughter got the disease. Okay. Now this daughter is married to this male here, and this male is coming from the union of these two. Okay. And this male also has the trait. This male inherited it from his mom. Now these two marry, and because both the mom and the dad are now having the trait, you see in the offsprings, if this particular pair produced 6 offsprings, 6 kids, you see out of the 6, 5 of the kids have the trait. So this is how geneticists make a pedigree. They do a pedigree analysis, they draw the family chart, and they will ask you, okay, which aunt showed this trait, which aunt did not, and they can learn, and they can predict so much from these pedigree analysis. So population, as I said, is a group of interbreeding individuals because they are members of the same species and they're present at the same time, at the same location. Now, when you take all the genes in one organism, the sum total of all the genes in one organism was the genome. But when you take the sum total of all the genes in a population, let's say all these individuals that are present in the class right now, if all of our genes are taken together, collected and studied, then the sum total of all the genes would be called a gene pool. Okay, so the gene pool is the sum of all the alleles, all the genes in a population. And when people study evolution, in evolutionary genetics, we don't care about a single individual. It has to be studied in groups of individuals. So that is why gene pool is important, because evolution means you study the gene pools. You study allelic frequencies and how they are changing. So evolution, and we'll be learning about evolution, evolutionary relationships. As human beings, as I said, we all share similarities in our gene patterns, in our chromosomes, and yet we are different. So there are some differences, and those slight differences have made us so different from each other, right? We could be different in the way we look, in our skin colors, in our hair color, in our eye color, heights, weight, so on. And yet we are all human beings. 99.999% of our genes, we have similarity. Now, if you compare our genomic or genetic sequences with other organisms, how do we know to which organisms are we more closely related? That means as evolution occurred, what is a more recent divergence? It means when did we part ways from that particular? So we compare our genetic sequences, and the more similarities we see, that means more divergence from that particular individual. Like 98% of human DNA sequences are shared with chimpanzees. Now, if you compare our DNA sequence with mice, with fruit flies, with yeast, there will be a lot more differences, but there will always be some similarities as well, which proves that evolution occurred. In this class, we will be learning about Mendelian versus multifactorial traits. Mendelian, this word comes from Mendel. Mendel is considered the father of genetics. He was the first one who introduced inheritance and patterns, and he was the first one who really did very scientific studies, kept records very scientifically, and introduced genetics to us. And the traits, the characters, the genes that he studied are known as Mendelian traits. He was very fortunate also because he observed something very, very simple, right? It's because he took by chance some traits which were controlled by a single gene. So it was not as confusing. If you have a particular character controlled by a single gene, then it becomes much easier to study. So those are called Mendelian traits. For example, polydactyly. Poly means many. Dactyly means digits or fingers. So you might have seen that some people have more than 5 fingers in their hands, or more than 5 toes in each feet. So those are Mendelian traits versus multifactorial. Multifactorial are the more common traits, means those characters or features which are controlled by one or more genes as well as the interaction with the environment. For example, hair color, for example, eye color. These are not really single gene inheritance. These are controlled by more than one gene. And most traits are multifactorial. Now, why do we study genes? Of course, we want to know, what are the different traits that we have inherited, or how the traits will be inherited in the future generations. But genes also give you information on your susceptibility, your how prone you are to a certain disease. Like, some individuals know that a particular cancer, breast cancer, runs in the family, or ovarian cancer, or prostate cancer. So this is concept of genetic determinism, where it is known that the idea that the expression of an inherited trait is inevitable. Nowadays, you can get your genome decoded, and it will tell you you are this much percent susceptible to this disease, right? A very a well-known example is that of the actress Angelina Jolie. She had lost her mom and her aunts to breast cancer and to ovarian cancer. So she just went for a screening test. So she got herself tested genetically, and she found out that she had BRCA1 mutation, just like her mom, okay, and other female relatives in her family. So she didn't wait until she knew that she was at a very high risk to get breast cancer and ovarian cancer. You see here, this was her quotation: 87% risk of breast cancer, 50% of ovarian cancer. So she went for a preventive double mastectomy. Double mastectomy means removal of surgical removal of both breast tissues, and also bilateral sapingo-oophorectomy, which means removal of both the ovaries and the fallopian tubes, okay, so that cancer does not develop there. So she was fortunate that she could get herself tested, beforehand. She had the means to do that, and then she got a preventive surgery done because she was at a much higher risk than an average female. Genetics is applied nowadays in every aspect of our life. You go to the supermarkets, you go to the malls, the food that you're buying is genetically modified, the GMO, and about which Sarah will be also discussing in one of the discussion sessions. For forensics, for detectives, police, DNA profiling, DNA fingerprinting is a very handy technique, okay? And it has applications not only for police, for finding out the history of a particular individual, ancestry, and so on. So this is a cartoon where we tried to explain how your DNA sequence, DNA profiling helps to identify or link a particular individual to another individual. So let's say this is the mom and this is the dad, and this is what their DNA pattern looks like. You see these bands, the mom has these blue bands and the dad has these greenish yellow bands. So if you see child one, and this is the child one's DNA patterns, you see this blue band corresponds to the mom's blue band, while this one corresponds to the dad. Is there any band that the child has which does not correspond to mom or dad? No. So that means child one is biologically these two parents, mom and dad's child. So child one, and let's say child three here are children of both, these mom and dad. While if you look at child four, none of the bands, DNA bands, are corresponding to the bands shown by the mom and dad. So child four is not the biological child of either of these two, while child two here is the child of the mom, okay, this one, because there are some bands that are corresponding, while there are some other additional, these red bands, which do not correspond to anybody. So she might have inherited this from her biological dad. So this is how DNA fingerprinting is just a very easy, simplified cartoon trying to explain DNA fingerprinting to you. Forensics and this DNA fingerprinting is used for, in case of terrorist attacks, in case of a crime scene. Let's say a person has been murdered, so the police go and they search for any fingerprints, any DNA sample that they can gather, maybe some spit there, some blood stain there, from where they can extract the DNA and they can identify the criminal. Or even in case of natural disasters like 9/11, when the bodies were destroyed beyond recognition, how do you know, whatever they found for a particular individual, how would they know that this individual was XYZ or ABC? And this is where they use this DNA fingerprinting technique. History and ancestry recently has been used. For example, revealing the offsprings of President Thomas Jefferson, the offsprings that he had with his, slave Sally Hemings, because this was not acknowledged in those times. It is later on and nowadays that DNA fingerprinting has revealed that he did father children with his slave, and now that side of the family is also acknowledged. Healthcare, pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics, as I was talking about, personalized medicine is very important these days because, it's like we all, one size doesn't fit, right? So we all have one individual might respond very well to a particular treatment regimen, to a particular medication, another individual may not, right? So for example, for asthma, most of the times if people are given, asthma patients are given these the SOS medication albuterol, okay, that they have to take. But very surprisingly, it was found that people in Puerto Rico, which is an island, US territory, Puerto Rico, they do not respond to albuterol. And when patients there were saying, no, I don't get any relief, initially medical experts were very, very skeptical about it. Why? Everybody does. And then it was found out, research was done. It was found that the individuals there on that island, they have particular SNPs which make them resistant to albuterol. So albuterol doesn't work as well in those individuals. So let's say this is a heterogeneous patient group. This is what any population represents. We are not all alike, okay? And usually nowadays what is done is, anybody from this patient group complains of something, they're given the same diagnosis, the same prescription, the same medication. But in future, it wouldn't be like this, because you see, among this population, let's say the red individuals, in them, the medication that is given is actually not doing any good. It's not beneficial. Instead, it is being toxic. While for this whitish bluish, the drug is not toxic, but it is helping the individual to recover. So this is the group which would really benefit from that. Here in the yellow group, the drug is not toxic, but the drug is not being beneficial either. And in the green group, the drug is toxic, it has side effects, it is showing toxicity, but it is beneficial as well, right? So a population is made up of these mixed group of individuals, and if we can find out how our genetic composition makes us respond to certain treatments in certain diseases, it would help benefit us in our treatment. So nowadays in healthcare, diseases are being described in terms of how our gene expression patterns show this, and this is, of course, was not considered in traditional medicine, but traditional medicine, biomedical science, medical science in general, this is evolving and this is improving every single day as more and more research is being carried out. So genetic testing and treatment, you see nowadays when kits are available that you can bring home and you can do genetic testing, you can send it out and you don't even need blood samples, you can just provide some saliva and the companies will do all of your genetic screening and they'll provide you information. And that is why as more and more genetic screening is becoming accessible, laws are being passed so that discrimination doesn't increase with that information. So the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was passed in 2008. Now, some other uses of genetics in agriculture. Human population has been increasing so much, right? And if biotechnology was not there, if organisms were not made genetically modified, if we didn't have those genetically modified corn and other plants and crop, half of the population would be starving to death. So it's because of, thanks to biotechnology and thanks to science, that we are able to feed this increasing population. Okay, there are so many limitations, and yet human beings have conquered. They have, with the use of this science and biotechnology and a lot of genetic engineering, that we have created crops which are high yield, means they give us a lot of food. They are disease resistant, so we are not losing the crops to pests and to other diseases. Ecology also nowadays uses genetics and genomics. Metagenomics is the term. It's a field which involves the sequencing of all the DNA in a habitat. And a very common example is the Human Microbiome Project. Okay, it is called the gut microbiome. Gut means your intestine. And you know, all of us in our intestine, we have a population of beneficial bacteria that help us digest food. Anytime you get a gut infection, you get diarrhea or dysentery, and then you have to take, let's say, you know, it doesn't get cured by itself, so you are forced to take an antibiotics. What happens? The antibiotics will go and will kill the harmful bacteria that have invaded your gut and that are giving you the diarrhea. But in addition to killing all the harmful bacteria, it also kills the friendly bacteria that inhabit your gut. And so after every antibiotic treatment, if you compare the bacteria that was present in your gut before the disease and after the antibiotic treatment, you find it's totally different. A human being never gets the same microbiome back. And recently, you know, the fecal therapy is also being used, where a person, let's say, has chronic digestive problems, cannot digest, and you know, has been on so many medicines and treatments which are doing more harm to the person. So nowadays what is done is the stool from a healthy person is taken. So this healthy person has a lot of good bacteria in his or her stool, and then that stool is treated or processed in the lab and made free of everything that can be dangerous, and then that is put into a pill, and that pill is given to the patient. And when the patient takes that pill, the pill goes into the gut, and those bacteria from the healthy individual's gut are then given an opportunity to populate the gut of the patient. Okay, and this is a kind of a natural way of again getting an opportunity to have your gut populated by the healthy bacteria that help you to digest complex carbohydrates. A global perspective, genetics and genomics are really hot topics. Okay, these are technologies that are vastly improving the quality of life, and they'll continue to do so. You will see more and more application of genetics and genomics in everyday life these days and in future. And we are done. Any questions so far from the lecture?